Today, are some banks cooking the books? Hello again, I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Welcome to our latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. The Bank for International Settlements, the Bankers Bank, has released their latest annual report. Within its 114 pages, the BIS confirmed that there is evidence that some banks are massaging their quarter-end results to fit within certain capital ratios using repurchase agreements, or repos, with central banks. This means central banks own financial operations with bank counterparties are making a mockery of any macroprudential regulation attempts by central banks. And this is just plain alarming. And this on the day Bob Katter tabled the Glass-Steagall bill into the House of Representatives.
Members' business, notice number 2, Banking System Reform, Separation of Banks Bill 2018.
And I call the member for Kennedy.
I present the Banking System Reform, Separation of Banks Bill 2018 and the explanatory memorandum.
Zero Hedge discussed these revelations in a recent post and started with a bit of history. In fact, several years ago, they showed how the Fed's then new reverse repo operation had quickly transformed into nothing more than a quarter-end window dressing operation for major banks seeking to make their balance sheets appear healthier and more stable for regulatory purposes. They showed how banks were purposefully making their balance sheets appear better than they really were, with the aid of short-term Fed facilities for quarter-end regulatory purposes. A trick that gained prominence first nearly a decade ago with the infamous Lehman Repo 105. You can see the peaks in activity over each quarter end. Now, some 4 years after the original allegations, the Bank for International Settlements has confirmed that banks may indeed be disguising their borrowings in a way similar to that used by Lehman Brothers, as debt ratios fall within limits imposed by regulators just 4 times a year, thanks to the use of repo arrangements. The BIS explains that window dressing refers to the practice of adjusting balance sheets around regular reporting dates, such as year or quarter ends, and notes that window dressing can reflect attempts to optimise a firm's profit and loss for taxation purposes. For banks, however, it may also reflect responses to regulatory requirements, especially if combined with end-period reporting. One example is the Basel III leverage ratio. This ratio is reported based on quarter-end figures in some jurisdictions, but is calculated based on daily averages during the quarter in others. The former case can provide strong incentives to compress exposures around regulatory reporting dates, particularly at year ends, when incentives are reinforced by other factors, for example, taxation. But why repo? Well, because as a form of collateralized borrowing, repos allow banks to obtain short-term funding against some of their assets, a balance sheet expanding operation. The cash received can then be on-lent via reverse repos, and the corresponding collateral may be used for further borrowing. At quarter ends, banks can reverse the increase in their balance sheet by closing part of their reverse repo contracts and using the cash thus obtained to repay repos. This compression raises their reported leverage ratio, massaging their assets lower and boosting leverage ratios, allowing banks to report them as being in line with regulatory requirements. The BIS says the data indicates that window dressing in repo markets is material, and says that data from US money market mutual funds point to pronounced cyclical patterns in banks' US dollar repo borrowing, especially for jurisdictions with leverage ratio reporting based on quarter-end figures. Since early 2015, with the beginning of Basel III leverage ratio disclosure, the amplitude of swings in Eurobanks' repo volumes have been rising, with total contractions by major banks up from about $35 billion to more than $145 billion at year ends. Banks' temporary withdrawal from repo markets is also apparent from MMFF's increased quarter-end presence in the Federal Reserve's reverse repo (RRP) operations, which allows them to place excess cash. This is problematic because this central bank endorsed mechanism reduces the prudential usefulness of the leverage ratio, which may end up being met only 4 times a year. Furthermore, the BIS alleged that in addition to its negative effects on financial stability, the use of repos to game the requirements hinders access to the market for those who need it at quarter end and obstructs monetary policy implementation. Now, this is hardly a new development. The use of repo borrowings is similar to a Lehman-style trick in which the doomed bank used repos to disguise its borrowings before it imploded in 2008 in the biggest ever US bankruptcy. The collapse prompted regulators to close an accounting loophole the firm had wriggled through to mask its debts and to introduce a leverage ratio globally. Now, Zero Hedge concludes by saying, how ironic then that it is central banks' own financial operations with bank counterparties that makes a mockery of any macroprudential regulation attempt by central banks and effectively exacerbates the problems in the financial system by implicitly allowing banks to continue masking the true extent of their debt. As always, if you like what you've seen here today, please like the post and add a comment or question. I do read them all. And if you want to join the growing band of subscribers who receive alerts when we release new posts, do subscribe now. I'm Martin North, the Principal Analyst at Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you again next time.